Hello, let's do a quick check-in with Codebreaker, Jennifer Doudna, Gene Editing and the Future of the Human Race by Walter Isaacson, a 2020 nonfiction work about the creator of one of the discoverers of Cryptor, or at least the discoverer of Cryptor, a natural process which scientists have figured out how to use to edit genes and edit genes very accurately and much more efficiently and easily, opening up sort of the Pandora's box. And in the last sections I'd been talking about, God, I can't even remember what sections we're on. I think I'm on like part 7 or part 8. The last sections were developing sort of the background, and then we've had kind of the background of Jennifer Doudna, now, and then we've had the sort of the race, the competition, the multiple many people who've led up to and competed to be the first ones to kind of break the code, figure out how that RNA can they can use this natural process of RNA to actually edit genes. And that humans can use it to edit genes. Bacteria, organisms were using it to defend themselves from viruses and stuff like that. Now we're using it to actually edit our genes, edit the things around us. It's got so many possibilities, and there was the controversy over who's going to get credit for it. We know that Doudna wins the Nobel Prize along with Emmanuel Christina, for they win the Nobel Prize for it. So I guess they won in history's judgment, or at least in the Nobel's judgment, which is usually what history wins. And also all the patents we get, the kind of the many court cases and judgments over who's going to profit from it, which big consortiums and universities and massive biotech companies are going to profit from the patents from it. And now we've gotten to consequences, where where Doudna and her collaborator figured this out in 2012. They and others were able to apply it to human embryos, not embryos, human DNA. But the next thing is like, well, but should we? Should we? And what are the consequences? And Doudna is very much puts herself at the forefront of this, organizing what's analogous to earlier agreements about scientists over DNA, and exactly what kind of limits should be put on, or how we should put the brakes on. Like, should we go buck wild and basically just start editing genes like crazy? And there's a distinction here between germ germline editing, which is messing with an embryo, changing the DNA of an unborn, like not even embryonic stage, so that this will create a new person who will then pass on this new genetically engineered DNA to future generations, versus I think it's called somatic gene editing, where it's a treatment that's going to affect that person, but that won't actually affect their children going forward. And there's a lot of debates. There is an agreement amongst the leading organizations and scientists that, well, no, we shouldn't do gene editing. We should make a moratorium on that. Not a moratorium. They're very. We should strongly just we should strongly encourage people not to do this, and that organizations shouldn't fund it. And indeed, that seems to be the agreement, until this young, kind of what sounds like a very kind of average scientist who's got lots of ambition, is very eager and sort of like, I'm going to be the first. A Chinese scientist decides, no, I'm going to be the first, and he's at least going to tell himself he's doing it for the best of all reasons, because he's going to help he's going to help children's of parents who, at least one of the parents has AIDS, to be able to be AIDS resistant. HIV resistant, even though it's not medically necessary. What can happen is that the father sperm can simply be washed clean, rinsed clean of the HIV, so that that isn't a danger. So it's not even medically necessary. But no, he wants to make them that one more step, make them resistant to it. There's great social stigma in China over people with HIV/AIDS. So, and there's a growing population of people who have this. So he goes ahead and does this on, I think it's 20 people, and children, 3 children are born this way before anyone really finds out. Actually, twins are born this way, and he's done a hack job where it's not even, he didn't even do a very good job of the thing. He does get prosecuted, ends up spending a couple of years in prison, is fined, and is banned from doing life science ever. He has a lifetime ban on life science. But it's one of these things of like, this was, he had funding from various organizations which didn't really know what was going on, or they probably would have stopped him. He did not check because he didn't want to be stopped. He knew they would say no. So it has let things out of the box, and Isaacson, with Dudna as kind of a guiding force here, talks about what are we going to do in the future? Should we shut down all of this? Dudna is like, it's not that she wants to ban it all. She wants to just have a pause while society figures out how we're going to use this tool. It's not like whether or not, or like it's been discovered. So it's going to get used. Try and hold things off long enough that it can be used responsibly, ethically, both in a sense of we're not going to use it to just go after socially undesirable traits, and things like being gay or being short or being ugly, or the how good looking you are, what is good looking, and stuff like that. Saying, you have the example of genetic diseases like Huntington's or sickle cell anemia, which are things that really affect big swaths of the population, or that this could do a real good for. There we already use takes the example of how there's other things that sort of like checking for genetic defects in embryos is already takes place. I think it said something like about 2/3 of the population, 2/3 of people who find out that their children have some form of Down syndrome end up terminating the pregnancy. So it's already happening, and in some ways is been socially accepted. And that what Dudna thinks is that we have this tool. Now we need to figure out how, as a culture, as a society, to come up with responsible guidelines and ways of dealing with this tool, because it's not going to go away. And that if we just ban it outright, we would get more jokers like this guy who's eager to be the first to to put forward to be operating in the shadows, or having tourism, CRISPR tourism, where you can't get it, you're not allowed to do it in North America or Europe, but hey, we'll go to this small country here where that someone's set up a clinic, and it just gets done there outside of the purview of the wider scientific community, with all sorts of abuses, and also economically um, outside of the reach of anyone who isn't fabulously wealthy. Someone does make the point, well, just because something's expensive now isn't a barrier, isn't a argument to say we should shut it down entirely. You look at all technologies, and they're always really expensive at the beginning. This phone uh, would be horribly expensive, completely out of the reach of me, if not for the fact that it is mass produced. You can also say that about a lot of medical stuff. If it becomes an accept if a medical treatment becomes accepted and is needed for the majority of the population, the costs will go down in it. So if it's not driven to be something that's underneath, but that this is something that probably people are going to want to use, and probably need to come up with a set of ethics and kind of as a culture to decide what it's going to be. I don't know what that is. I don't know what those are going to be. There's a part of me that's like deeply horrified by this guy in China, where Isaacson shows one biohacker guy who's like, "Oh, awesome! That's super cool! That's neat!" Which really reminds me of a science fiction novel by Rudy Rucker. His what are they called? Wetware software novels, which are all about a culture where it's just sort of Wild West biohackers creating all sorts of creatures and stuff like that, and it's got a weird amoral sense to it, and it's like, yeah, we could just let things go Wild West, and that's the kind of culture, that's the kind of society we would create. So if we want to have sort of we want to balance out innovation and change with probably what's fundamentally a protective conservatism that happens, that is inbuilt in the human body, which isn't to say in the human body politic, which isn't to say that we're going to make the right decisions. We've made decisions about things, other technology like cars, like our energy sources, like coal, um, perhaps nuclear power, that have had horrible ramifications in our world. So that's not to say that whatever decision we come up with as a group is actually going to be the right one, and it's within a capitalist structure. And is that going to be a structure that is going to preserve the dignity of human life? Does human life human life have dignity within a capitalist, for profit, competitive, competitive system, individualistic system? It's a lot of deep questions here. It's Isaacson's doing this in very snappy little paragraphs, but it does make me want to do more reading on this. I'll credit him for that, because there's some bioethicists who seem to be like, that's just not natural, and shut down the conversation, which are just like, those books have never interested me. So having different ideas, different changing ideas of a world that is going to be completely unrecognizable to me is valuable. Is unsettling and invaluable. Probably should need to put on my science fiction hat, even though it's more futurism, I guess, than science fiction. But science fiction is a good way of thinking about the present and thinking about the future. Expecting there'll be a lot of CRISPR novels that are already probably published that I should pick up in the science fiction field. All right. I'm going to leave it there. No ums, no ahs. Well, few, but I'm working on it. All right. More videos later.